Hello everybody. This week I'm going to do a bit of an informal talk about some things that are on my mind and things that have been kind of dredged up recently due to Leah Remini's show Scientology in the Aftermath, which I'm very happy is now an Emmy Award-winning show. I now get to say the Emmy Award-winning Scientology in the Aftermath. So well deserved and so well done to Leah and to Mike Rinder, who has been obviously instrumental in making that show what it is and contributing to its content and format. The first thing is the child victimization. This season, I knew this was going to happen, that there was going to be focus on that. And I was absolutely blown away by the first episode that featured Sina and Miriam and the sexual abuse that has occurred with children in the Sea Org. Specifically, it is monstrous, and covering that up is absolutely an atrocity on the part of the Office of Special Affairs and the Church of Scientology in general. This was not something, by the way, that we were generally made aware of when we were in the Sea Org. I was made aware of 2 instances of statutory rape, and both times that it happened, the offending adult was, punished within the guidelines of the Sea Org, being sent off to the RPF. And I, in the mindset that I was in at the time, which was a pretty awful mindset, and in reflection, I can't really easily rationalize or justify the behavior, but just saying that when I was in at the time, this wasn't right, but it was the idea that the punishment that was being meted out to those guys was better than what would, than if they were turned into the authorities and it was made a big mess and Scientology was, name was splattered all over the headlines and stuff. And this, of course, speaks volumes about how deep down the rabbit hole the thinking goes, that I would be thinking that Scientology's good name was worth more than the lives and well-being of the children and the minors who were involved in these incidents. But that's the twisted logic of being in a destructive cult, and one of the things that's propelled me to speak out so strongly against it ever since. And you start waking up to how deep down a rabbit hole you were, how brainwashed, a horrible word, but how much you were into a mindset that is an awful mindset. This week has been one of a lot of self-reflection for me, after the last 2 episodes especially. And this was one of the things I've been sort of self-reflecting on, was my mindset then and my mindset now, and how that's changed. And anyway, yeah. So the child victimization, I mean, I just, regardless of any ideas, thoughts, attitudes I or others have had in the past about that in the world of Scientology, or I guess in other destructive cults too, I just very much need to say to anyone out there who, I might have adversely or badly affected when I was in. I've apologized before, and I'm going to apologize again, because I can't believe that I ever contributed to anything that had to do with forwarding Scientology's aims and goals as more important than the lives involved in it. Just absolutely, I'm so ashamed of that. And I've said before that I didn't have any regrets about, my time in Scientology and stuff. And I guess from a very, individual point of view, like I guess I could see how I would have said that, but I wasn't really thinking clearly and saying, I have no regrets about my time in Scientology. I wasn't really clearly thinking about what I and others did to other people, the way we victimized people and the way that happened. Absolutely, I regret all of that. For somebody to get into Scientology and fall into that whole mindset it definitely speaks to a lack of critical thinking and to a lack of awareness, of situational awareness, of which pilot speak for knowing what's going on around you. But but for the kids and, for the second gens and third gens and fourth gens and stuff, it's just straight up victimization. It's really what it is. And Scientology really is, it needs to, it just kind of needs to go away. If only just for that reason alone. Okay, now another thought that I had, another thing I wanted to talk about is, it's interesting how you see a lot, the church has really stepped up its budget, its anti-critic budget over the last year, I guess, and especially over the last few months. When season 2 was announced and started coming down the line, I really saw an increase in the social media ads, targeted ads, attack ads, as well as, of course, the anti-Leah website that the church puts up. But it's a lot more than just that. There's also other things going on behind the scenes that are not broadly visible. There are whispering campaigns, little black PR campaigns that the church is so good at doing, affecting critics, people in the ex-Scientology world. There's always been a certain degree of tension. Aaron and I did a video, last week where we talked about some of the tension that exists with people who have differing attitudes, but we really wish, everybody could just kind of stay on the same page and stay focused. But I see that there has been more effort made on behind the scenes activity to rile up critics against other critics. More so than I've ever seen before. Now, I haven't been on the job here for decades, but I've been on for years now, and I've just never seen it so strong. And where you might have a legitimate gripe or a legitimate disagreement between critics, usually we can resolve those things or kind of agree to disagree. But lately, it's been like, and I'm absolutely positive. This is just my thinking on it, but I'm positive that this is incited, that there is work done to fan the flames of these disagreements. And the really sad thing about it is I don't think the people who get into these battles and fights are even aware of the manipulation that occurs to them. You get somebody who's 2 steps out. Let's say you have Critic Joe and Critic Sally who are at each other's throats over some disagreement. They don't know that 2 steps removed from them, maybe, or maybe even 1 step removed, is somebody who is a church-enabled, OSA-enabled person, a manipulated person who is egging them on or feeding, fanning the flames of the disagreement or keeping it going. And that is absolutely an operation that the Church of Scientology engages in. And not just the Church of Scientology, of course. We see this in politics, and we see this on other social media forums. And unfortunately, lately, I've also been made aware of how this occurs with other, not just the Scientology crowd, but with other religions, other ex-members of other ex-groups also get this kind of these whispering black PR campaigns, I'll call them. In other words, a dedicated effort on the part of a person who knows what they're doing to take down a critic of a cult group, right? And that person who could be working in that dedicated fashion could themselves be a cult fighter or ex-member of one of these groups, but they get it in their head, and then they start, like a little spider with a web, they start activating, other people to work against somebody that they just have some problem with. And in the case of Scientology, what I'm saying is that I think behind that dedicated effort and person, you will find somebody from the Office of Special Affairs egging them on, and that person doesn't even realize that the person who's egging them on is from OSA. So that has stepped up over the last, I don't know, I've noticed the effects of it over the last 4 or 5 months. And much more so since season 2 started. But that sort of thing is it goes, to be effective, it's a long-term campaign, and it's the sort of thing that goes on for months before you start seeing signs of it, where you start seeing the people who are at each other's throats. So anyway, I guess I'm just sort of talking about this because I need to want to appeal to, you know, my fellow critics and people at large who are into looking into Scientology and checking out what this is all about, that there are a small number of us who have dedicated quite a bit of time to trying to expose the abuses and wrongnesses of Scientology. And when you enter into this world, you enter into a world of people, some of them damaged. You know, I'm not saying that they're mentally ill. I'm saying that they're damaged, right, by this cult experience, and so they tend to be a little punchy, you know, about some things, and a bit sensitive about some things, and you can push those buttons. And this goes back to an OSA tactic of finding out what a person who's a critic or an enemy of Scientology, find out what they love and find out what they hate, and start pushing on those love-hate buttons that they have. This is a dedicated effort, right? So that's why I say that when you see this sort of thing going on and it doesn't easily resolve, that I think you're looking at, you know, the effects of a campaign or an operation. So that has stepped up. Now, is it going to end the ex-Scientology movement? Is it going to stop any of us from speaking out or seeing what's going on and give up? No, it's not. Not even a little bit, right? We might get at each other. Critics might get, you know, into squabbles or disagreements with one another. But if anybody thinks that you, being OSA, who I know watches my videos, so if you're watching this, or anybody else who's watching this who's contributing to this kind of conflict, thinks that what you're doing is going to stop what we're doing, well, you can definitely guess again, because that is not the case. I haven't for one moment thought of, well, gee, maybe I should just stop then. You know, no, that's not at all what's going on here, because the effort on our part to expose Scientology is much stronger than our desire to maybe get along with one or two of our fellow ex-members or critics, okay? So anyway, this is happening. The other thing that you're seeing happening, well, let me mention something else first. I have noticed a massive increase on the part of Scientology with their ads and the media buys, ad buys that they're doing on my videos. I'm sure on every other monetized video that is put out by any ex-Scientologist, you are seeing, you know, anti-Leah ads, and that is a huge investment. Excuse me, on the part of the Church of Scientology. They're spending money on that, and they're spending big money on it. And I can't help but notice that the irony of it is that they claim for years and years, for well over the last decade, they've been claiming to their members. David Miscavige has been saying that they've been planning and setting up and executing these brilliant Scientology marketing campaigns and commercials that only air when the Super Bowl plays or during times when there are critical shows about Scientology. They'll play them then. They'll play them during, you know, when 2020 does a interview with Ron Miscavige, and then Monique Yingling comes on. You'll see ad buys done then on 2020 for the Church of Scientology, and you'll see them, like I said, at the Super Bowl, or maybe, you know, during around, you know, Leah, all this stuff that's generated about Leah's Show, around Leah's Show, on Twitter, on Reddit, on Facebook, and yet here's what you don't see. You don't see the Church of Scientology spending that or more, like they should be, on positive Scientology campaigns to promote the good works that Scientology is supposedly doing. They have not and are not and likely will not do any positive, spend any money on any positive campaigning to get people into the Church of Scientology. And I find that endlessly fascinating. Because it kind of proves my point. I've had my ups and downs as to whether, you know, my doubts about whether I was right about asserting that David Miscavige doesn't, truly does not care about the growth of the Church of Scientology, and he's not trying to get new members in. I've said that multiple times, that I do not believe he's trying to do that, but sometimes I've wavered a little bit. I've been like, I don't know, maybe, maybe he's trying to do a little bit. No, he's not. And the negative ad campaign really shows how, when they do care to put advertisements out, when David Miscavige actually cares about something, you see the results of it, right? And so you see all this negative campaigning and negative advertising about Leah and about anybody connected with the show. Every single guest, whoever comes on, gets a hate page, gets hate videos made about them by people who are still in the mindfuckery of Scientology, even if they're relatives or close friends of theirs, or in my case, my ex-wife. I mean, it's awful, right? But it doesn't really have any effect. But anyway, that is something that David Miscavige will invest endless amounts of money in. But, try to say something positive about Scientology, try to put something out there that, will actually work to show the good works that Scientology is doing. No. Negative. Crickets. Nope, nothing. And with that, of course, also comes like this petition that they put forward, Scientology did, to try to get Leah off the air, and the millions of Scientologists out there, supposedly, I'm not going to use air quotes on that, but you can just imagine them, can somehow only muster up 7,500 signatures for a petition to counter Leah's show. Pathetic. Really pathetic, right? This effort on the part of the Church of Scientology. And in so doing, they have alerted their members that Leah's show exists, that it's bad, that it's negative, that it's N theta, and that they need to do something about it, which of course is going to spark a bunch of them to watch the show. And of course, wake up as a result of doing so, because you can't, even as deep in the Scientology mindset as I was, as a Sea Org member, right, when I was really down deep into it, if somebody had shown me one of Leah's shows, man, how do you, especially when I had personal knowledge of some of what was going on, in the second season, in the second show of the second season, they talked about the suicide of Aaron Paulson. Well, I knew him, right? It's irrefutable. I was like, what? I did not know that happened when I was in Scientology. They totally covered that up, right? Finding up Miriam and Sina. Well, I didn't know about those two when I was in. I knew both of them. I knew who they were, but I did not know that had happened to them. But I did know two other people that happened to. So, these shows are just brilliant at nailing these points. And any Scientologist who watches these things, really watches them, is gonna hit the road as far as Scientology is concerned. So big, huge mistake on the part of, the church to, if they're trying to engage in information control, which they are, then alerting, all of Scientology to the fact that Leah's show exists, huge mistake. And of course, now that they have done so, the other thing that I'm seeing, in addition to all the ads, is I'm seeing more Scientologists engaging with us critics or on social media about how horrible and awful the critics and the lies and Leah and Mike and all this stuff is. More than I've ever seen before. They are desperate. And the way I've described it is they are not only circling the wagons, but now they're starting to shoot, right? They're like, all huddled in. And the church is just, man, for the last couple of years, it has been really revving up the pressure on its members. But I've been seeing more Scientologists commenting on my YouTube videos, engaging on Twitter, and then, of course, on Facebook. The Scientology groups are just going crazy over this. So this is really, really having an effect on the world of Scientology. And I wanted to note that because this is important. When a documentary like Going Clear comes out, it's a one-off. It happens, it has a cycle, and it's done. And it's not like it's not visible or seeable anymore, but it has its thing, and it's kind of done. Leah's show has been season 1, now season 2, maybe a season 3, wins an Emmy in the middle of all this, right? Getting gigantic media attention. Every single show we're seeing articles in Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, Business Insider, right? On Salon.com. On the show. Every show is getting like a summary the night after, and they are just amazed at what is being portrayed on the show. So this is having more of an effect than I think anything in the past ever has, as far as blasting out the information about Scientology's abuses to a tremendously wide audience for a sustained period of time, right? You just can't, it's hard to ignore. It's hard to not see it. For Scientologists, I'm talking about. And so now they're reacting against it. And that is something new and different from earlier efforts and campaigns. It's all been building. It's a snowball effect. And I think that this puts Leah's Show in a whole new category of influence, of anti-cult, anti-Scientology influence. And that really needs to be noted, right? Just as a person who has been doing this for a little while now and watching the history of this, and even though I wasn't involved in in the mid-early 2000s or the 1990s, I wasn't around then. I was in Scientology then, and I was one of the bad guys. But now that I've been out for a few years, I've talked to tons of people who were doing the work back then, read all their articles and blogs and videos and stuff, and the effects that we're having now are huge. And it's unpopular in the ex-Scientology world to start talking about the end of Scientology, but I'm just going to say that I have never ever been as hopeful about the negative repercussions on the church, or the negative consequences of something on the church, than I have been from what I'm seeing from Leah's show. She is absolutely making this happen in a very, very effective way. And whether the government, here's the thing, whether the government takes notice or not, and we'll see if they do. I've talked about this, I'll keep talking about it, but I'll probably even have, Jeff on next week to do another podcast to talk about this some more in terms of IRS influence. But whether that ever happens or not, the death of Scientology in the media is complete, right? And I mentioned that, they haven't run any positive campaign or work to show how great they are. Well, that's contributed to it too. But even if they did now, even if Scientology tried, every Scientology ad, every Scientology commercial, every media presentation that I've seen put out by Scientology at all on any forum now is absolutely received with nothing but ridicule and flat out nasty comments, ridiculing comments, and all very, very enlightened comments, because they point to the truth that we have been exposing as critics, in some cases for years. They're using that information, and they know that information. They're educated about Scientology. So we are really reaching a point where I don't think they're ever coming back. Right? It's just gradually just downhill from there. And I've never felt so positive about saying that Scientology is dead, and it just doesn't know it yet. Now, the other thing that I wanted to sort of mention or talk about here on my channel is that I think I might have made one or two passing mentions to this before, but the last week's show about David Miscavige featured Gary Jackson Moorhead, who was the security chief at Gold at the INT base, and he told a story about how he convinced his then wife, when he was in the Sea Org back in the day, in the mid-90s, to have an abortion. She didn't want to do that, and he convinced her to do it, and satisfied his seniors that he would do it, and he proceeded to, sit her down, and I assume based on the idea of the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics, And using Hubbard references and policies, he convinced her that it would be in, the best for, everyone that they abort their child. And that caused me to have to look really, really hard at something that I did as a Scientologist, as a Sea Org member, which was pretty much exactly the same thing that he did. And I have not really talked about it. And it has been something that I have been horribly ashamed of. And I guess in a way have been very hesitant to talk about or mention, not just because of the shame connected with it, but because I was actually in a bit of fear at the reaction to confessing to something like that. Not because I'm, have an anti-abortion stance, because I am left-leaning and I believe in choice. I believe that women should have a choice. But the problem, of course, in Scientology is you don't have a choice. You're not given any choice whatsoever. You are dictated to. And that happened to Gary. It happened to me. I was sat in a room with a couple of executives. I was told in no uncertain terms that this abortion was to happen. It was made very, very clear to me that I was going to be in a great deal of trouble, not just as a Sea Org member, but a Scientologist, if I did not make this happen. And that there was no choice in the matter, right? That's the point here, is that it wasn't up to me to decide whether I was going to be a father or not. That choice was taken out of my hands, and I was then tasked with convincing my then wife that she had no choice in the matter either, and that she needed to, go get this abortion. And to my ultimate shame, and I did that, and it took a lot for me to dredge that up. This season of the show has really been dredging up a lot of memories for me. 27 years is a long time, by the way, to be involved in something, and I don't have full recall of everything that happened when I was in. So sometimes it takes some work to dredge up some of these memories, and this show has really been doing a number with me emotionally in getting me to look at some of my past and some of the actions I took that I really, really, really regret. I'm not talking about this now in some sort of, I'm not trying to talk about this because I'm trying to get something from anybody or trying to, get sympathy or some kind of, bullshit like that. I'm saying it because I have never had the guts to talk about it before. And I figured, well, if Gary can fess up to this, then so should I, regardless of, whatever the consequences are of what you guys might think of me as a result of this. And I have to admit that has been a concern or a consideration that I've had when I've thought about this before. So anyway, that did happen to me. So the idea that, whenever the church says that they have no history of coercing abortion, that there is no problem with kids, that they are all about family, I know they are lying through their teeth, through their whole face. They are lying because I experienced the blunt end of Scientology's hammer, when it came to abortions in the Sea Org. So, and their attitude about kids and all of that. Right? Because if from what I said at the beginning of this, if my attitude about children and about minors and about sexual abuse and that sort of thing if I'd had my head on straight about that stuff, then I wouldn't have condoned any of that. And but I did. And so now I have to, I have been and have to continue to live with that, for the rest of my life. And it's really been in my face this last week about this, and I've really had it on my mind a lot to how do I talk about this? What do I say? So that's what I guess I'll say about it. but I just want you guys to know that that whole abortion thing was not an isolated activity at the INT base. It was not an isolated activity where I was. It was Sea Org wide. It went on for years and years, and I think that to this day it still goes on. I think that the amount of pressure they might put on people now is less, but I think it depends on the person. Because I think if there was somebody who had skills that the Sea Org really, really felt they needed to hold on to, they would sit that person down to this day, and they would rake them over the coals and try to convince them through any means necessary to stay. And I think that as their numbers become less and less and they grow more and more desperate, they're going to rev that up. So there's and the reason I can say that is what reason do I have to believe they wouldn't? In the end, destruction and unkind, in the end, Scientology is about making money and very little else, and anything that threatens that money-making activity is a threat to them, and they will go to any lengths necessary to prevent that or do away with that person or those people or whoever is threatening their income. So it's shrinking. It's going downhill fast. I think really, really fast now, and I think it's only going to continue in this vein from here on out. And I can't wait to see what else Leah's got in store for the rest of the season, because I haven't seen anything else yet. I did get a chance to preview a couple things that were coming out this season, but everything else is going to be just as new for me as it is for you guys now, and I really can't wait to see what else is going to be exposed, and how much more Leah and Mike are bringing this fight right to the church's doorstep and beyond. At this point, for somebody to become part of the Church of Scientology, you'd have to be everything that you guys comment on, when you talk about how you'd have to be an idiot, a fool, or this or that. At this point, that is now true. In the past, not so much. For second gens, not so much, right? But from this point forward, oh yeah, there is no excuse. There's no excuse at all. Not to join Scientology, not to join Om Shinrikyo, not to join the JWs, any of them, any of these destructive cults that are out there. Bill Gothard's group, all of it. So anyway, just a few thoughts I thought I would put together here. I know this was awful, random, awful, off the cuff of me, and I hope that this communicates well, but I just wanted to get some of this off my chest and talk about how thankful I am for Leah's show and what she is doing, and Mike Rinder for what he is doing, and I really, really hope that they continue in this, because they are the battering ram that we have all needed and wanted against the Church of Scientology and its abusive practices. So thanks again to all of you guys out there for supporting, all of Leah, Mike, me, Tony, all the critics out here, right? Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for your assistance and your help and your comments and your feedback. And that's what I have to say. I will talk to you guys again soon. Bye-bye.